All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Reed Wilson, the founder and editor of Pluribus News. Still got some people coming into the room here. I want to thank you all for joining our latest Pluribus Spotlight event. We have more attendees today than we've ever had for any other event, which I think is a testament to just how much artificial intelligence policy is on all of our minds. And because there are so many of us here today, I'm going to race through these introductions so we can get straight to our panel discussion. First of all, I want to introduce Connecticut Senator James Maroney. He's a Democrat in his second term representing Milford. He's the Deputy Majority Leader and the chair of the General Law Committee, and he's spearheading a new bipartisan multi-state working group of legislators thinking about AI policy. So welcome, Senator Maroney. Texas Representative Giovanni Capriglione is a Republican who's in his sixth term representing a part of Tarrant County. He runs his own private equity management firm, and he's a member of the Innovation and Technology Caucus in the Texas legislature. Virginia Delegate Michelle Maldonado is a Democrat who's represented Manassas since 2022. And as a point of personal privilege, she has a degree from the George Washington University, like I do, but she has a law degree, so she definitely worked harder for it than I did for my classics degree. And Colorado Senator Robert Rodriguez is a Democrat serving his second term representing Southwestern Denver. And he just added a new title too, and welcome Senator Rodriguez. Last month, his colleagues elected him as their new majority leader. So congratulations for that. I'm sure it's added about 16 hours of work to every week of yours. With that, I'm going to turn this conversation over to my colleague, Austin Jenkins. Austin, take it away.
Thank you, Reed, and welcome legislators. We're really excited about this conversation. This is a hot topic across the country, in states across the country, and we'll get right to it. And Senator Maroney, I want to start with you because I'm looking for some context here. You and several of your colleagues here have been working on data privacy, comprehensive data privacy for a number of years. Now you're heading into the sort of unknown world of AI and trying to figure out what to do about it. And you've started this multi-state working group that's bringing together bipartisan legislators from around the country. Can you just explain what your goal is over the next couple of months with this working group? Why are you convening legislators from around the country to talk AI? And you're on mute. Hopefully you're going to pop off mute here. And if we've lost the senator, I'll have Representative Capriglione jump in because you too have been working on these issues, and I know you're part of this working group.
Sure. Part of the reason, and I'll talk until the senator is here, but part of the goal, of course, is we've all worked on data privacy, we've worked on cybersecurity, we've worked on legacy modernization. So in a way, this is a way to roll all of that up, right? To take everything that we've learned, not just the technical part of it, but also the process by which we were able to pass some of that significant legislation in the past, to carry over some of the details we learned, like on security, on how to fund some of these things, how to go make it applicable to certain groups, and how to enforce it. And so with all of that knowledge, and given the speed at which artificial intelligence is increasing in our day-to-day lives, how it's affecting our citizens, knowing how quickly the next legislative sessions are coming up, I think it behooves all of us to start working on this now, and to work on it in a way that's bipartisan, to work on it in a way that's bicameral, right? So that way we, at a minimum, have a good starting point for legislation in the upcoming sessions across the country.
I know Senator Maroney has talked about interoperability, trying to get some definitions, common definitions, even if your bills end up looking different. Representative Capriglione, you also passed a bill this year, in addition to your data privacy bill, to create an AI advisory council in Texas. Delegate Maldonado, you formed a bipartisan tech and innovation caucus. You have introduced now an AI technology initiative to bring together lawmakers, industry representatives, and others. What is you're heading towards the 2024 session? What are you thinking about in terms of AI regulation? What's your priority?
Well, thank you for that question, and thanks for having us here together today. And I see Senator Maroney is joining us again, and I'm honored to be part of that steering committee too that Senator Maroney is working on with our fellow representatives here. And when we look at, we have a sort of a mirror initiative happening here in Virginia. And as somebody who worked in technology, both as a technology lawyer and as a tech leader, what I notice in our legislature and across legislatures in our country is that most of us don't know a lot about technology. And then you add something like AI that is moving and changing overnight and is so dynamic and so swift. We have a lot of work to do to help educate our legislators, to help educate our public, to inform us and to see the role and the impact of AI and related technologies in government decision making and digital competency of our residents across our Commonwealth. And that works across the nation as well. And so in Virginia, we brought together a really sort of great collaboration of people from the public sector, from academia, from legislature, from our current governor's administration and various agencies to really look at some of these issues. And some of it we've pulled in some of the EU AI Act risk category frameworks, just as sort of guiding posts for us. And I think the goal ultimately is to look to see where we can shore up our existing legislation around technology, to look to see where we can create new opportunities that balance innovation and competitiveness of our businesses and agencies with protection and privacy of our citizens. So I think there's a lot we can do around that. We also do need a work group. Our governor just last week issued an executive order looking at that. So we'll have some support and parallel work at the legislative level and at the executive branch level. So I'm really happy to see us all kind of coming together because, as everyone can attest here, this is a we issue and we have a lot of work to do, and we've got to work quickly because technology moves at the speed of light and everything else moves at the speed of molasses in comparison.
And I'm glad you mentioned the governor's executive order. Several governors have now issued executive orders on AI. Senator Maroney, welcome back. We'll come to you in just a moment. Senator Rodriguez, Colorado is a leader on data privacy in 2021. You're now the newly elected Senate Majority Leader. I'm very curious to know where AI regulation fits on your list of emerging priorities for next session.
Thank you, Austin. Happy to be here with everybody. I think, and many of the colleagues here, and Senator Maroney, and many of us, as just the consumer data privacy bill came, I think, the third state, and then it's kind of dominoing into multiple states as it's been pushed. But as you can talk to any legislator who's worked on this policy and these discussions and fights, it's about a hodgepodge of states. Well, they always say we need a federal regulation. Well, the federal government has been a lot slower on this stuff. So I think Senator Maroney's gathering everybody together to come up with some type of uniformity across states for an industry that touches us all, but it isn't a state by state, whether it's gun bills and stuff, you can regulate more local control. This is a global thing. And I think taking the stance that we've done and having uniformity is a big issue. Data privacy and consumer information is a big hot topic as everything's getting automated and electric and put online. Dealing with this, even the consumer data privacy bills we ran years ago, we were way behind the times with where we were at now, and jumping ahead with AI 2-3 years ago. AI has been around for a long time, but it's peaked so much in the last year that do we take a stab at it now to try to make sure the right controls and accountabilities are in place now versus waiting till it's too late. So I applaud Senator Maroney and the group together. I think this is an innovative idea to do policymaking. Now that we have the technology that's been developed to do this, the ability to us work together to streamline definitions and wording so we're not hodgepodge of different states doing it. So I'm excited to be part of the coalition, and I think it is a big priority for the caucus and the country and the world as it shall be. So thank you.
Well, I think it merits just observing the fact that this is essentially state legislators are freelancing as you go, but to kind of create these ad hoc working groups across states, across party lines to try to figure out how to proceed or to get on sort of the same page definition wise. I don't know that there's a precedent for this. Senator Maroney, I want to bring you in, and we heard kind of about the working group, so I'm going to move on from that, but feel free to reference it as well. But I want to ask you about the timing. I mean, the AI genie is clearly out of the bottle. But then again, it's still early. So the question is, is it too soon to write effective regulations for this emerging industry? And And as sort of a corollary, should state lawmakers even be wading into this, or is this really only happening because Congress isn't moving fast enough?
Austin, thank you very much to the question. Thanks to my colleagues for their answers before. And you can see why I'm so excited to work with them and other colleagues around the country to try to come up with some broad guardrails for AI. Both Senator Rodriguez, who was the third state to pass the consumer data privacy, Connecticut was the fifth, and we learned a lot. Senator Rodriguez was very helpful to me in passing the bill, and then Representative Capriglione, who has passed a bill in Texas, and of course, Delegate Maldonado, who brings that experience of working in tech. As far as if it's too early, I think that's the argument that you're always going to hear. It's too new to regulate, but then once you get going, they'll say, well, we've been doing it this way for so long now, you can't change the rules of the road on us now. So I do think it's something that we've learned from data privacy that we do need to get started earlier. And I think just setting out some clear guardrails, I think it is incumbent on the states, to lead in the absence of federal legislation. And we know that, what isn't given to the states is really, what isn't given to the federal government is left for the states to do. And I think that it is important for us to get started now. Again, it's striking that balance, as we've heard my colleagues say. We don't want to hamper innovation, but we also want to make sure that we're protecting the rights of our constituents. So it's trying to work together so we can find a way to strike that balance.
Delegate Maldonado, there are a number of potential upsides to AI and a number of potential downsides and concerns. What is your leading concern about AI? Where are you most concerned this could go awry?
Well, I think we've already seen examples of where it goes awry with deep fakes, with using AI to create imagery, videos of people saying and doing things that are not them, or infringing upon trademark and patent rights. Look at our writers' strike and all those things. So at the same time, there is a great opportunity. There's some amazing things that are happening with AI. For example, it used to be hours upon hours where algorithms and technology would have to listen to your voice to be able to replicate it. So for people who are living with terminal diseases like ALS, who lose their voices, it took a lot to try and preserve their voice. But now AI can, for example, take 3 to 5 seconds, sample, and then replicate your voice. So people living with conditions where they are compromised can continue to speak. That's the beauty of things that are happening. But the shadow side is the deep fake, for example. So what we really need to do, I think, is take a different approach. And two things. The first is we are so used to in the law, and particularly in Virginia, it's okay to cite law from 1812 as current direct authority. We get used to passing a law and thinking that's the law for it forever. But with technology, we have to be a little bit more flexible and nimble and know that we're always going to have to assess and reassess and tweak because technology is always going to grow. So we have to sort of shift our mindset about what it means to pass law in this technology sort of explosion. And the other thing is to think about how do we begin to embrace it in a way that acknowledges the risks by integrating within the algorithm itself security, as opposed to security measures being on the outside of it trying to track. We need to integrate it inside and outside so that we can also figure out the things that it's learning that we haven't asked it to learn. We know, research in the data, that our AI, it's generative and it's growing and it's learning things. It's learning things we ask it to learn, but as a result of those efforts, it's also learning things we haven't asked it to learn. So we also have to figure out ways to identify what it's learning that we don't know about.
I know that lawmakers are going to be, and you often are, you're going to be sort of stuck in this tug of war between what industry wants, and perhaps that's going to be a light touch approach, or maybe a go slow approach to regulation, what consumer groups may be advocating for, which is perhaps something more robust. I know that some of the consumer advocates have called for a zero trust approach that is modeled almost like in an FDA drug approval process for AI algorithms. On the other side, the software industry is saying the framework for what's called a bias risk management strategy, And they also say that third-party audits, which the consumer advocates have supported, are premature. So Representative Capriglione, I bring that up just because I'm curious about how you strike the right balance between regulation and industry self-governance, regulation and consumer protection.
Sure, and I think that's going to be a challenge for everybody who's looking at how to do that. I think you have to start on step one, which is what exactly is the difference between, let's say, artificial intelligence and current programs that are already being used in place, right? And I think that's going to take some education for people to realize, listen, there's already a lot of software out there that manages very complicated systems, that manages things like employment practices, that manages high-risk situations like electrical systems and other critical pieces of infrastructure. So step one is, how are these AI models, how are they actually different? Because in certain circumstances, they're not, okay? And in those situations where they are, where does the government have a place to fit? So for instance, let's take, for instance, when people talk about transparency, right? Which I know people want for sure, but the reason you want that transparency is to ultimately find the responsibility for that program making those decisions, right? There are so many laws on the books already. Let's say, for instance, on employment practices, right? Obviously, no discrimination, those sorts of things. Well, can we use those current laws that we have in place already and include AI along with other software? Or are there sections of law where we have to look at it differently? We did this, for instance, when it came to autonomous vehicles here in the state of Texas, right? We already have laws on how to, whether you're speeding or not, or what the regulations are on driving a car. What we didn't have is who that liability would ultimately go to, right? And we decided to take a light touch approach on that here in Texas to say, listen, it's the person who turns on the vehicle. We're still going to let you go out and analyze the roads. We're going to let you go out and do your modeling and your experimentation. Now it's probably getting closer to the point where these vehicles will be out on the streets. They will be picking up passengers. They will be in these situations. And that's probably a better time to start looking at the risk factors and where the law needs to be on those.
And to our panelists, I want to invite you to feel free to jump in too if you want to augment something one of your colleagues has said or push back or offer a different perspective. You're welcome to do that. Senator Rodriguez, to that point, what do you think about states at this stage starting to get pretty prescriptive, both about defining what constitutes high-risk AI, then laying out an approval process, and as the consumer advocates are saying, they want to have third-party kind of independent auditing, a lot of eyes on this. I know industry is going to say, look, maybe that's a little too aggressive, too fast. Where are you going with this? Where's your thinking at this point?
I thank you. I think Rep. Capriglione hit a lot of the nails on the head, and that's the big conversation we're having now is, you know, where does the liability lie? Is it the end user? Is it the manufacturer of the technology or the programming? And where, how that interacts at the end of the day, I think for us as lawmakers, it's obviously the end use for us is, while we don't want to stifle innovation, how do we justify and make sure we're not allowing harms to happen to our constituents and to the people as a whole? And you're always going to get into that argument with the companies who say it's a little too soon. But if you don't have, you know, and you have to have a good framework, like a lot of this could be through the AG's offices or some type of person, because I think we're going to get into the arguments of proprietary information and we need this stuff. But then again, if we don't have access to know how these decisions were made, whether it's for biases or harming somebody, how are we going to know that something happened? You know, they're going to just say, you have to trust us and we're doing the best. And I think that's where the catch is going to get. And I think the discussions we've had a couple meetings, and we really haven't dug into the ethical piece. I mean, a lot of us have had broad discussions. I'm currently at a conference where they're talking about election misinformation and the ability to fake, you know, somebody saying something or use somebody else's voice is super scary, and people aren't going to realize that's happening. And how do we make sure that we're not allowing that to happen is where we get into the nuances of how we get into who did it and didn't. A lot of big companies are going to outsource this. Your Googles, Amazons, who have ginormous banks of information that are developing these tools for a front end consumer who's going to be told this is going to make your business very profitable. It's going to make everything easier. You're going to be able to streamline processes, but those end users aren't going to be able to understand any glitches or something that's happened on the back end of information. And how do we get access to knowing that that's happened is the discussions I think we're in right now. And obviously leaving room for good controls, but to be able to grow and adopt.
Senator Maroney, there's so many ways to tackle this. I know you're already starting to think about teeing up legislation for 2024. There's government use of AI and there's commercial use of AI. I know that the recent NCSL report on AI talks about different approaches to regulating AI, which can be very sector specific, where you go after, how AI is being used, for instance, in healthcare versus a cross-sector approach. What are you thinking about as the most effective approach you and your state can take, at least in the first of what's likely to be many steps?
Yeah, and agreed that this isn't going to be a one and done type of legislation. As we've heard, we pass laws and we need to go back and update them. We did pass a law last year looking at government use of AI, and a lot of it we tasked the Office of Policy and Management with developing policies and procedures. We are working in parallel with the task force to make some recommendations to them, but ultimately they will decide, with the key piece of that being that as of February 1 of next year, they cannot employ systems that use artificial intelligence unless they've done impact assessments on them ahead of time to ensure that there is no disparate impact on the Connecticut residents. So for next session, I think I'm looking at broad guardrails. I'm not looking at going sector specific. I know that the different agencies and the regulators are looking into that. Of course, for medical, the FDA already regulates the use of AI in medical devices. So we'll look for our insurance agency and the banking department to put out regulations there. What I'm interested in is, those broad guardrails, making that pause and requiring safety testing before you put something in effect. So requiring an impact assessment. We still do need to determine if that's going to be internal as it is and self-certified, like with the what's our data privacy law. I'm leaning towards that approach. I know there are some who would rather see an independent audit. I think that ultimately I would love to see the federal government step in if they do create a federal department or office of AI, that they would be do that independent, oversee that independent testing, just like with the FDA for the safety of the meat and the food we eat, or USDA for the food and the FDA for the drugs. So again, that is definitely a role I think that would be better, independent assessment left to the federal government. But what we're looking at is, accountability and transparency, accountability, the impact assessments, making sure there's no disparate impact or discrimination. We are looking at and have requested a report of all of the laws in Connecticut on the books already in regards to discrimination to see which ones need to be updated. And we've actually, NCSL is working on that for every state across the country. So that's something that all legislators will be able to have access to see if it's necessary to create new laws or update existing ones. The transparency piece, looking at some form of digital watermarking. So for the generative AI, putting some meta tags or some way that people would know that it was generated by AI. As well as disclosure if a decision is made about you using AI. It's kind of what we're looking at to start. And then we'll, as we learn more and as we see it adapted into more of the industries, we may need to go sector by sector, but those are the broad guardrails we would look at doing in 2024.
Let's stick with sort of this preview of what's coming in 2024, because I think that there's real keen interest in knowing what's right around the corner. So Representative Capriglione, you have this AI task force. I'm interested in your timeline. Do you want to wait and see what the task force brings back? Do you anticipate having legislation for 2024? And if so, what would it look like and how might it be similar or dissimilar to what Senator Maroney is talking about for Connecticut?
Sure. And for us, I guess in Texas, we have either the benefit or the negative of having sessions every odd number year, right?
Sure.
So for
Good
us,
point.
the goal
You have a little bit of time here.
we have a little bit of time, but we're
Yes.
starting already. At the end of October, for instance, October 31st, we're having our very first AI at the Capitol Day, right? Where we're inviting people from all over the country to come and start providing their input. Full day of sessions and conversations with lawmakers and industry and so on, and citizens who want to participate and start providing input on that. With the council, we'll be able to do that as well and get this information. Of course, we're going to be looking at bills that are filed in other states and so on. And so we have that time, and it is in an effort to go and start putting a package together. And whether that's us filing legislation at the beginning of 2025, or already working with our regulatory agencies, right? Because a lot of times it's possible through our agencies to start using the current rules, go and say, hey, this is the kind of things we want. We did pass a law already at the end of last session that's going to start looking at how the government uses and providing inventory and asset control, how it's used in those agencies now. But I mean, when I look at this and piggyback off a couple of things other panelists have said, first of all, I have zero faith in the federal government actually doing anything before the legislature in Texas meets in 2025 or 2027, right? There's a lot of benefits for the states being involved in this, right? Primarily, we've got boots on the ground. We're talking to our constituents now. We're hearing from them right now. And we just don't have the discord or, we have the ability to be able to pass these things into legislation. I mean, at the end of the day, we have a Speaker of the House, right? I mean, so we're way ahead of where the federal government is. And I hope that they look at what we're doing and use that as a model for them. I think the second thing, too, when it comes to this is our goals are in line with what people want. And one of the biggest risks to us, I think to all of us, is on the political misinformation and disinformation side, right? We can't wait on that kind of things. We waited on the privacy stuff, okay? And in that process of waiting, hundreds of thousands of data points on every single citizen was collected, right? It's still out there. The internet is, in fact, forever. So it is time for us to start looking at this and planning ahead for session, whether it's in 2024 for some people or 2025 as it is for Texas.
Delegate Maldonado, same question. What do you anticipate doing first? There's a lot of talk about consequential decision making, and that is really laser focusing in on decisions that affect people's lives, employment decisions, education, access to benefits, healthcare. What are you thinking your state could do first as it sort of ventures into this world of AI regulation?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I agree with Senator Maroney's sort of approach of a light touch. And there are certainly things we can do initially as we wait for more of the studies and the recommendations to come out. Just because we have studies doesn't mean we do nothing. We've tried that approach before around the country, and we saw where it got us, particularly with the generation one of AI being curative, and then having our social media companies be on Capitol Hill saying, hey, we need regulation, we need guidance, and we kind of missed the boat. Now it's generative, and people are already up on the Hill saying, hey, we need guidance, we need to be able to do this. So what I see us looking at in our sort of steering committee of the Technology and Innovation Caucus is looking at providing recommendations to those groups, looking at how we potentially seat our AI subcommittee on JCOTS, our Joint Commission on Technology and Sciences, and look at some of the tweaking we can do with our current technology laws. So we have in 2022 passed a facial recognition technology bill for Virginia State Police, but there's a few things we can do to tighten that up given the new world. Same thing with our Data Privacy Act that we passed some time ago with the good work of Delegate Cliff Hayes and Senator Dave Marsden. I also think that there is opportunity to be able to look at some protections around our children and youth that don't run afoul of First Amendment rights that we've seen in other places. So I'm looking at that. And then ultimately, I think there are three key areas that we need to really focus on, and that's healthcare, that's sort of our public safety, criminal justice, and it's also in our benefits place, our sort of HR, because those are places where the data and decision-making have such direct impact on the daily lives of people. So one of the things I'd like to see us do is identify our high risk and unacceptable risk categories and focus there first, because those have the most consequence. And what's great about this exercise, if you will, is that it naturally asks us upfront to discuss and explore disparate impact, unintended consequences, and potential discrimination of groups. And that's a conversation we always need to be having up front, but sometimes we're working so quickly, we don't really engage in those conversations until something happens after passage of the bill. So I think there's some great areas there. And then, of course, just collaborating across the different branches of government and the agencies, and being a resource for them, as well as we put in some initial legislation to help shore up and hold place as we continue the good work.
Just briefly as a follow-up, do you have any thoughts about sort of third-party independent auditing, transparency around the algorithms, which of course then creates tension, I think, probably with industry saying, intellectual property, you don't want all eyes on it.
Yeah, this is going to be, as noted here, this is going to be a place of contention, but there are a couple of things that we can plan for, prepare for. So a lot of times what we'll have are what are called APIs, applicable programming interfaces, which are, just think about it, a little connector to the broader database or a set of data. Those things would connect to essentially our government agency databases, the things that we create on this side. And so some of the things we have to talk about are who owns the data, how broad is the access to that data, and does that data get commingled with other data? A lot of people, when you start to bring in third parties, they want to aggregate the data, commingle it with theirs so they can do reporting, they can do targeted marketing, all these things. So there are necessarily some protections in place around access to data. And then we need to think about, do we even have the human resources to conduct internal audits? Do we have enough people skilled in this area in-house? And I would say probably the answer is no. And what we need to do is make sure we're investing in the professional development and the talent acquisition for in-house, as we have people inside informed to decide who on the outside can partner with us. And so I think there is a yes and approach to this. We need to have internal audits, but we have to have the people skilled to do it. And then we have to have some external ones, because I don't believe in people just auditing themselves all the time. So the external audits could be less frequent, and the internal audits could be more frequent. But as an industry, it's not just internally do we have the people skilled. As an industry, there aren't enough people that understand how to perform these kinds of audits. So as a nation, we have to upskill people to be able to do that.
And if I could just add a little bit to that as well, I think you're dead on point, Maldonado. And it's not just about making sure our agencies that are going to do this enforcement or compliance are skilled. It's our people as well. And I think one of the biggest challenges, as we see how big artificial intelligence, machine learning is going to be, we need to upskill our workers. I think you're dead on point. I mean, this is ultimately going to be a battle, competitive or not, between the United States and other countries as well. So I think this is also a good opportunity, besides just looking at how to regulate artificial intelligence in and of itself, but how do we go and we get more people that are skilled from a younger age at college, or upskill, reskill individuals, so that we're competitive on this as a country. And I think if nothing else, that's one thing we should all be able to agree on in all the states, is how do we improve our workforce and get ready for this.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned this, because I will confess to sort of the bias. I'm asking you all a lot of questions about what you might do to regulate this industry, but there is competition, global competition around AI, and certainly with China, which wants to be the leader in this. And so I'm glad, and you've mentioned workforce issues now, which are cross-cutting across all industries. So I'd welcome any other sort of thoughts or comments as we continue the conversation from the other members about ways to sort of foster this industry and foster the workforce of the future in AI. Senator Rodriguez, I want to ask you just again about sort of that first bite at the apple, what you think might happen in 2024 in your state vis-a-vis AI regulation. Is it too early? Do you think you'll pass a bill? Will it be multiple bills? I know it's probably early to be giving a definitive answer, but help us peer around the corner.
I think this policy is obviously, Senator Maroney, it's a broader discussion, and as you go along, you find, and currently there's enough topics, and it's the old adage of how to eat an elephant one bite at a time. This policy is going to be probably broad stroking and with some kind of self accountability built in, but it can't attack industry specific because it's too broad of an industry in the way it's utilized. Whether I have an interest in some of the HR hiring, decision making, termination pieces of it. Obviously, election stuff is pretty interesting to me. I don't know if I'll be carrying those type of bills. I have had some PTSD from the last consumer data privacy bill I ran, so I took a break off, and I'm flattered to be looking at some of my colleagues' other bills passed in other states, that have looked at it. Whether it'll run next year or the year after our discussions, I think this evolves quick enough. And even the things we're talking about now in 2 years, it will probably be other things that are added to the list as this technology gets utilized in different spaces. So I don't have any plans. This is a good big lift. I think throwing too many things at the kitchen sink is probably not the best idea. And other states are the laboratories that will look at this policy that can help lead it. But hopefully with some of this policy, it lays some groundwork of how we can proceed looking at more industry specific workforce and the jobs that are going to be lost with this technology, and how do we retrain workforces for the new age. And there's a lot that needs to be looked at, but I have no set plans on other than a couple of bills in this space next year. In Colorado, each legislator's allowed 5. So it's just this kind of bill would be enough for any one legislator, unless they just have a have a lot of willpower to push some of this stuff through. So it'll all be a big topic. So.
Senator Maroney, as I dig into this, I'm quickly overwhelmed with how many data points or issues that legislators might need to consider. Do you need to regulate the training data, which is the stage at which humans can start to introduce bias into the algorithms? What about regulating open source AI? Should you require registration of AI systems? Should the results, if there's a impact assessment or some other sort of formal assessment of how this works, should those be made public? On and on and on. Is there a method to the madness here?
I think, excellent points, right? The more you weigh into this, the more you learn, the more areas you see it's being used. And to, Senator Rodriguez's point, there's the unknown unknowns. We don't know where this is going over the next year or two. So we will be back at it. There are so many things. Who owns the content, right? Looking at copyright, should it only be allowed to be trained on copyrighted data? How do you compensate the people when you're training the models? There's so many defining the risk. How do you set up a system that's flexible so that you can add new high risk if you're going to do a risk-based, or perhaps something becomes safer? Do you want to lower the risk, right? You no longer want to make it a prohibited activity. So there are a lot of questions, and I think that one of the keys is how do you build flexible legislation, which is a key for so many issues, right? For workforce. Workforce needs to change faster than government's ability to respond. Tech changes faster than government's ability to regulate. So it's trying, I think now, as Senator Rodriguez said, not to bite off too much, to be focused, to put in some protections, and then to just stay at it. But I think that's also why it's important that we are working together. The 4 of us are on the steering committee for this multi-state working group. There's over 90 people who are a member of the group, a lot of legislators in all of our states, and we all listen. Task forces, as you've heard, in Virginia and Texas, and AI Day in Texas. We're having a big meeting. We're running our task force, our last meeting, December 13th. We're going to invite in a lot of people to look at not just regulating, but promoting the growth of health tech and using AI for health in Connecticut. So I think incorporating as many voices as we can and listening, it helps us to develop better legislation along the way. But there are a lot of questions, and right now, not a lot of answers. So I think just focusing on the broad strokes.
Well, maybe just a point of clarification, since several of you are veterans of the comprehensive data privacy wars. Are you thinking that AI regulation is done in a comprehensive way, the way that data privacy has emerged, or do you see it as a separate and different approach where you sort of chunk it out over a number of years, if that makes sense?
I think the chunk it out is probably the best approach. Data privacy is not, I mean, you've got data privacy just for collection of data. We haven't even talked about the public information of privacy that's now electronic, that's probably too easily accessible. You got biometrics, you've got AI in so many different buckets, and to try to do that in one omnibus bill just gets overly wonky and complicated to do. Like a lot of the privacy bills didn't touch a lot of these different spaces because it's just the definitions and the legislation is just, it's different exposures of how it's used and defined, that to try to do it all at once would be a humongous lift. That's probably why the federal government hasn't taken it on. So
Well, another way to think about comprehensive data privacy is a lot of that is like, here are the rights of the consumer. And so, and the White House has issued an AI Bill of Rights. I think that that's a focus of a lot of policymakers, is just what are the consumers' rights here? So Delegate Maldonado, any thoughts on establishing clearly the rights of the consumer in this AI brave new world we're entering?
Yeah, I do think, I think it's going to be interesting, because I do agree, because this is such new technology that we're learning, and it's moving so quickly to sort of chunkable bite-sized pieces as we go forward. But there are some probably things that are horizontals where we look at, particularly maybe going back to our data privacy laws and shoring them some things up to protect our citizens there. And I think as we figure out the AI legislative efforts, that would probably be one of the key places for us to focus on, to make sure that our people stay protected as we're learning the best ways to be flexible and breathable in the legislative process for the AI algorithms and its use and deployment in government decision-making and across our states in business or nonprofit organizations. The second piece of that is, I will say, is that whatever we decide, there necessarily should be an element of human QA. So if we rely on these on AI and related technology to determine the decision without any human QA at some point in that sort of supply chain, I think we run the risk of seeing things like we saw before, the way algorithms sort of had a discriminatory impact, whether that was in the hiring process or it was in the allocation of benefits. So we have to make sure that we're not just thinking about efficiency with these automated algorithms, but also what is the human element that still needs to be part of it, as we also figure out how do we address the human element of displaced workers through it.
We are running short on time. I have a quick follow-up for Representative Capriglione, which is, am I crazy to be thinking that, like, if every state was trying to regulate the airline industry, for instance, that would be sort of unusual and maybe not ideal? That probably should emanate from the federal government. And sort of to your prediction that you're just not banking on Congress, is that why state legislators need to move? And is this really an abdication on the part of Congress? Should they be doing this? And since they're not, you have to? Or do you think legitimately in this century, as new technologies emerge, this is an appropriate and needed role for states and state legislatures?
No, I think actually that's a pretty good analogy of, okay, there's a bunch of different airplanes that all have to be able to eventually get from one airport to another airport, another state. But I think if each state were to come up with its own laws, for instance, on airplane and traffic control and that sort of stuff, they would eventually work together, right, to go and figure out how to create a framework that would work across those states. It would behoove everybody to do that. And I think that's what we're trying to do here on this conversation, what we're trying to do on our multi-state workforce, right? We're just trying to speed up that process by which each state is already communicating so the planes fly in time and land at the right place. But no, absolutely. I'm probably more, obviously you sense a little bit of jaded and cynicism for me about federal government's ability to do this. Not that they shouldn't have a role in things that obviously affect different states, but I just don't see that they'll be able to do this in the speed that's going to be necessary. All right, you can look at Moore's law. where things in technology get, twice as good in 18 months, whether it's performance. I would say for artificial intelligence, with the amount of investment that's going in it right now, it's going to be more than double that. By the time the next congressional session meets, we'll see 4 to 8 times the efforts and the ability. And so for us in our states, we're able to do it quicker. And in answer to your other question in terms of, do we do an omnibus bill or quick shots? I think the answer is yes. I think there are some things that we have to look at on a framework level that will be agreeable to a bunch of different states. But there are going to be things like, for instance, what are the disclaimers necessary in political campaigns when you're using artificial intelligence, for instance? And those are going to be smaller bills, but just as important as we work on it.
Think that I can we can get 2 more minutes and then we'll wrap up. And I want to take those 2 minutes to give you each an opportunity to leave us with a takeaway message. And, I know that we've got fellow state legislators watching this, legislative staff, people from industry, consumer advocates, privacy experts tuning in, and everybody wants to know what's coming. And I think you've done a fantastic job, all of you, of helping us kind of peer around that corner. But just a brief 30-second wrap up from each of you. Delegate Maldonado, where would you like to leave the conversation? What do you want us thinking about as we head off for the rest of our day today?
Yeah, thank you. So what I would encourage people in legislative bodies, in various sectors and agencies, or just ordinary citizens, is that we have to look at this as a we issue. It cannot be divided as opposed as to them versus us. Even when we get to the really contentious things, we have to think about what is the greater good that we're trying to achieve here. And so I encourage people to work together, to stay open, particularly with things that we don't understand, and ask questions. We may not know what we don't know, but if something seems strange, something seems confusing, ask the questions and seek out those who are working in the space to be able to bring and bridge that coalition together. Because whatever we do first, it is only the first thing. There's so much more coming with this, and there's so much more responsibility that each of us have, not just legislators, not just companies, but all of us have in this extraordinary effort.
Thank you so much. Senator Rodriguez, a final thought.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to echo. I think, anytime you do policy and stuff like this, I think when you think you got to a good balance is when both sides don't get everything they want. And I think the idea of open ears and trying to listen and understand, at the end of the day, I think as legislators, we absolutely understand there needs to be innovation. There are a lot of great uses and people want and enjoy this stuff. And also on the business sides that are providing it, understand that there's consumers that are afraid and fearful. And it's just the old adage, with great power becomes great responsibility. And the listening and trying to figure out a good compromise on both sides is at the end goal, I think, of all of us as legislatures, and balancing this new emerging thing and understanding that, government's a slow moving ship. We'll make some attempts. Don't freak out, because at the end of the day, we can always fix it or we may have to tighten it, or there's always necessary things to change. So, I think people are in a lot of scary spaces because it's coming and they're fearful of over regulation, or people are feeling we're not going to go far enough. But knowing that this process is just one step in the longer thing that'll be worked on for years and years to come, just have an open mind as we go into these policy discussions.
Senator Maroney, a final thought, and it does strike me that this is a case where, to some extent, legislators maybe learned from data privacy that it doesn't pay to wait. And it sounds like you're maybe approaching this a little differently, move a little quicker this time.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Austin. I think, as Delegate Maldonado said, it's critical we think of this as a we issue, and the we meaning multiple legislators. Any legislators who are listening, we'd love to work with you. Please reach out to any of us on the call. Our next meeting of the multi-state task force is October 12th, 12 to 2. So email us and we will get you added to the list for that. Echoing, I guess, Senator Rodriguez and giving homage to Reed with his plastics degree. Seneca said, we have 2 ears, 1 mouth, listen more, talk less. So we are engaging industry, engaging as many people, but learning from data privacy. And from what I understand, it was the early 2000s when the federal government started looking at doing some form of comprehensive data privacy legislation. They haven't gotten there yet. we can't afford to wait 20 years to do legislation on ag.
Just lost you. We just lost your
That works for everyone, and as Senator Rodriguez says, the fairest thing upsets both sides. So I guess we're looking at upsetting everyone right here.
Representative Capriglione, I'm going to give you the last word.
Sure. Well, I would say to the legislators who are on here or thinking about it, this is a very technical topic, but you don't have to be technical to start looking at the policy. Just start getting educated, talk to folks in the industry. And there are so many facets to this. There are plenty of opportunities, whether you're healthcare focused or transparency focused or financial focused in what you do. There's opportunities and risks that AI is going to present themselves. So there's a lot of opportunities for all of us to work together on policy. And last word, if you're in Austin on Halloween, definitely check out AI at the Capitol Day. It's going to be a good opportunity for all of us. And for the other members who are on here, start working with your other peers and start coming up with how we're going to deal with this in the next year or two.
Costumes optional or required?
Yeah, no costumes. Politicians are scary enough. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand this back over to Reed. I really appreciate the conversation today to all of you.
All right. Thanks, Austin. And thank you so much to Senator Maroney, Representative Capriglione, Delegate Maldonado, and Senator Rodriguez. I think that was a great conversation. And I think we have to start talking about scheduling our next AI-focused event pretty soon because of so much interest from our audience today. Somebody actually asked a question about whether or not this will be up for viewing on demand. Yes, we'll get it up on YouTube later this afternoon once I get it all compressed and all that good stuff. But thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm thrilled by the turnout. I hope you'll join us for more events in the future, and please consider becoming a Pluribus News member. Your support means that we can bring you more conversations like this, and we really appreciate all of it. So mark your calendars for the next Pluribus Spotlight event on Wednesday, October 18th at 1 p.m. when we'll be talking to two very different governors about the future of clean energy. Other than that, thanks again to our legislators. Thank you all for being with us today, and thanks for being a part of the Pluribus News community.